I tried. I gave up what I tried. I gave up.
When Trent first contacted me about creating a video sequence for his new concert tour, he talked about the idea that there needed to be a counterpoint to the high energy intensity of the music, and that this was going to occur somewhere in the middle of the concert. So I immediately got the image in my mind of a storm, and the fact that you can never really comprehend the power of a storm in nature until you've experienced the calmness of the day after. And that contrast, lets you know what the nature of this energy force is. So that idea of the eye of the storm, of the calm center of the storm, never really left me through the whole project. Now, if you have a storm, and in this case the storm gave up, which comes at the end of the first half of the concert, and by that point the energy is just through the roof. I mean, it's almost over the top. The lighting is intense, there's strobes firing off, and the band is like really peaking up. And so then you have the first problem or issue is, how do you get from that energy of Gave Up to La Mer, the following song, which is probably one of the most lyrical and calm songs that they've ever done. And so this was done in a couple of ways. First of all, towards the end of Gave Up, these lighting panels start to descend from the ceiling, and they move from a horizontal position down to a vertical position facing directly out into the audience. And the other point, which is key for me, was that these lighting elements had to somehow make the transition to becoming picture screens. In other words, to becoming images. And that is a really delicate and essential moment. So again, keeping with the idea of the storm and the sea, which runs throughout this particular section here in terms of the music, I came up with the idea of having drops of water appear as ripples and disturbances on these color fields. So what we did was we went to a pool and got these large scrims, these large screens at the poolside, and backlit them with different colored lights, and then shot into the reflection of the water. So you're just seeing these pure color fields, and then slowly introduce drops from above that disturbed the surface of the water. And at that point when La Mer takes hold, the energy of the whole place just comes down. There's this tremendous move, like the kind of a cresting of a wave, and then it sort of flattens out and becomes still again. And that's really the function of La Mer at this point in the performance. And La Mer, of course, is a French word that means sea. And again, thinking about the idea of the storm, the water imagery for me, came back. I thought about things like water. In terms of water, you could have a kind of a calm and soothing experience. At the same time, you can also have a violent and life-threatening experience. And the lyrical nature of the song, beginning with these very rhythmical chords, which are actually quite complex. There's a very complex rhythmic structure in that piece. It's very deceptive, how simple it is, but at the same time how complex it is. And I wanted to let the images actually provide a base for the music. I'm really not interested in illustrating music, and certainly not in cutting on the beat or throwing in every little movement in the song. I think images can function, in contrast to a lot of music videos, images can function as a kind of a base or a steady state that allows the music to flow and ebb and crest over top of it without having to be too finely detailed and too illustrative of the form of the music. So there are long sequences of colors changing. All of this stuff was shot looking into the surface of the water and observing various things, particularly colored light panels that were reflected in it as the water became disturbed in different ways. And what we did was we shot with underwater cameras and overwater cameras in a large pool. and we used colored lights to reflect into the surface. We sometimes shot from under the water looking up at that surface. Other times we shot from over the water. And what was really interesting to see when this thing got finished and we were there in the hall listening to it and watching it, I was really amazed at this crowd of people that a moment before had been revved up to maximum intensity. When the images started to appear, they went into this viewing mode, and the whole energy shifted and calmed down. And as people watched the images unfold, with La Mer, again, a very beautiful and lyrical song. And the other image that comes up in the idea of La Mer, the word La Mer, is a female image. The sea in most cultures in the world is a feminine force. And at a certain point in the piece, a woman appears. She literally floats out of the depths towards you. In my mind, in many ways, she's the spirit of the sea. And if you look back to ancient Greek culture, you have the idea of the sirens, these female beings who really resided in the sea, and they sang songs that lured sailors to their death. A lot of drownings were explained by the call of the sirens. So you have this sort of connection between beauty and violence, which I think certainly is very important in my work, and I actually get a lot of that from listening to Trent's music. So the Great Below starts with a sonic texture. And what we see on the screens, on the three screens, are this ocean landscape. And it looks very Japanese. One of the images I got from looking at the composition, the overall composition of the three screens, made me think of the Japanese, the vertical Japanese screens. And so what I did was I took these scenes that I had of the ocean, and ironically in this case it is the Japan Sea. I shot images when I was over living in Japan, and I compressed them digitally, squeezed them so that each screen shows a complete image, a complete video frame compressed to fit the narrow form of the screen. And then the music changes, goes into a rhythmical pattern, and we see the same image spread across all the three screens like we've been looking at before. And all of a sudden, this apparently still image begins moving, and we see movement appear in the waves. That was another element for me, like the transition that initiated the whole beginning of this section, was to get from the world of stillness to the world of movement. And how do you do that? So in this case, I just started moving frame by frame until it kind of came up to speed. Then there's images that were shot in Californian poppy fields, which when the poppy season hits in early spring, if the rains have been right during the winter, are absolutely hallucinogenic. And I went out there with my little camcorder, like a lot of other tourists, and really just literally gave myself to those flowers. I had a very ecstatic experience in the poppy fields. I would be down rolling around in the flowers with the camera on, down on my hands and knees lying completely prone in the midst of this intense orange field, orange sea. Now the momentum of the song starts picking up, and the camera at a certain point is at the seaside. It literally plunges under the water, and there's turbulence and bubbles seen, and then there's these kind of strange plants that you see. That was seaweed on the side of a rock. This sequence was shot in Big Sur in Northern California, probably one of the most beautiful seaside landscapes in the world. The key image in the video sequence for The Great Below is this shot of this man who's literally floating in the air or in some kind of void. You don't really know quite what's going on. At this point in the song, the music is peaking, and Trent is singing about giving himself to the sea about descending from grace in arms of undertow. And at that moment, the guy hits the water, hits the surface that you never knew was even there, and there's this tremendous explosion, visual explosion. Again, all seen upside down, because what we're really talking about here, what I was connecting with very strongly, is in fact this is actually an ascension. It's an image of ascension, of transformation into another world, into another state. And so the world as we know it is turned upside down. And the way out is not down, the way out is up. And what you're actually looking at is an image of a guy who has just stepped off a high diving platform and is falling about 30 feet in midair until he hits the water. We had to drape the entire background with huge black cloth to absorb the light, to make him appear like he was floating on black. The cameraman had to time the camera move down. The human body falls at about 33 1/3 feet per second, which is about the height of that diving platform. So that whole event that you see really takes place in a second, or actually slightly less than a second. And so that was a very, very fast camera move. It had to stop right when he hit the water, so the water would remain at the edge of the frame at that moment. The Great Below is one of my favorite songs. Trent has a way in his music of working with very simple and clear forms, but then when you get into it, you realize that there's a level of complexity there, and it's a lot more complex and deeper than you thought. The lyrics in that song actually were very inspirational and kind of carried through all of the three pieces that I worked on. The beginning of The Mark Has Been Made is absolutely sublime. You can feel the waves in the music. You can feel the surging. It's a gentle kind of surging, but there's a lot of movement in there. And the image that conjured for me was being at the surface level, right with your eyes right at the surface level, and allowing the waves to wash over you. So this third piece in the sequence of three video works accompanying the music begins in a mountain stream, and there was a lot of rain at that point, and the streams, which very often in California are dry, were actually really swollen and filled with water. So what we're looking at is the camera as it's moving slowly with this rushing water coming down the mountain, moving in and out of the creek, sometimes plunging underwater, sometimes above water. The music is very beautiful and mesmerizing through this sequence. And then that abruptly changes when Robin does this really interesting guitar riff, solo guitar riff. And at that point, the image goes black, and there's this red blob in the middle of the screens. And what that is actually is a distant fire that was like a beacon of light in the void. Then there's a moment when all hell breaks loose, literally. The music just explodes, and we see images of fire. The camera at this point is actually literally moving into the fire. I had a special fireproof housing made for my camera, which allowed me to take it and physically put it right into the flames, right into the fire. I mean, I wanted to be in that fire. I wanted to have the eye of the camera, to have us move right into the flames, literally. Then there are other images that appear. You see, again, water comes back. You see legs moving underwater. It's again this guy struggling against the current in this stream. And that then is counterpointed to a man's legs as he actually walks through the fire, along with the camera following him very closely. The Mark Has Been Made really begins to take off. And unlike the first transition that got us into all these video sequences, where there was this moment of revelation where a water appeared and an image appeared where you didn't expect it, the way out of this section is through this acceleration and increasing intensity of the music, and these huge, what I call power chords come in and just picks the whole thing up and starts ramping it up again back to the level of the first half of the concert. And the images are intense. You see a guy getting hosed with water. You see images of fire and flames. You see a man appears again, connecting us back with this figure of the person that's come up throughout all the three pieces. It's rather hard to see, but the last image in the mark has been made, which appears to be fire, is actually the image of a naked man's body floating just under the surface. And there are rippling shafts of light shimmering across his body. Even though it's all underwater, even though the camera is submerged, we actually get the impression of fire. It's like this guy is literally submerged in fire, in liquid fire. And then it just instantly transitions into the next song.